Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, as Governor Bel Edwards knew he would have to battle the budget, his first year in Baton Rouge was also marred by violence and flooding. We'll look tonight at year one in the governor's term. We'll also examine the status of TOPS, one of the state's most popular programs, and the latest on charter schools. A local bank is having troubles. We'll examine why. And the Ochsner system expands even more. All of this, plus trying to make Bourbon Street safer, are on the beat for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Curt Sprang, anchor and reporter, WGNO-TV Channel 26. Kathy Finn, freelance business journalist and author of a biography about Tom Benson. And Danielle Dreilinger, education reporter, NOLA.com, The Times Picayune. We go over to Curt first, and Bel has had year one, and it was certainly a busy one, and year two is going to be kind of hectic and challenging as well.
And it may look a lot like year one in some respects. You may hear some of the same themes being repeated. Yeah, here was a guy who, frankly, going into the race for governor, didn't exactly have the highest name recognition in the state, but he certainly slayed the giant, beat David Vitter in the runoff, and I think, as we all recall, it was kind of an early night. It didn't go late into the evening. We knew pretty much early on who the next governor was going to be, and he spent the first year of course, making good on as many campaign promises as he could and dealing with a lot of crises that, frankly, nobody could foresee happening. He made it a point in his address this week to talk about one of the things he is most proud of for his accomplishments, and that is expanding Medicare in the state. Medicaid, rather, in the state. And he says that 370,000 people now have coverage. It didn't have coverage. And he says that it saved the state $184 million, which is good news because we're just finding out today that there's even more deficits that the state is looking at. The governor also touted $100 million in grants for infrastructure in the state. But the backlog of projects, he says, is something like $12 billion. So $100 million is nice, but compare that to $12 billion, there's a long way to go for sure. He says there have been more than 5,000 jobs created. And he says that he made $850 million in what he describes as painful cuts. And he made it very clear beforehand, saying that, we're not at the point where you can have anything other than painful cuts. But there were also things that the governor couldn't have foreseen. He couldn't have foreseen the flooding that he had to deal with in the Hammond and Baton Rouge areas. He couldn't have foreseen the Alton Sterling shooting, the shooting of the police officers in Baton Rouge, and he spent a lot of time on that. He spent a lot of time going to Washington to try to get what's going to be billions of dollars to help the area recover from the flooding as well. And he's still looking at more deficit. So it looks like another special session could be in the works for this year just to deal with the $300+ million shortfall that we're finding out that the state now has just to the end of this fiscal year. So, he's got a lot of work still to go, obviously. And
he has said he intends to call another special session for cuts over, about 300, I think I read it was like $318 million in cuts. And he doesn't want to see all of that fall on health care and education.
And he says that the cuts that he made to education, while there were some severe cuts, he says, hey, we've had past years where we cut more. And as far as trying to get more revenue for the state, he is hoping lawmakers will take a good look at the tax laws in the state and make some changes to those tax laws and try to increase revenue that way as well.
There has been a commission that's been meeting for months and months and months to take a look at the exemptions, particularly in the credits, to see if there can be some revision there, because there are those who say we're just giving away the store here and we have to change those tax exemptions. You mentioned something, Curt. One of the big things the governor campaigned on was, I am going to implement the Medicaid expansion. That is part of the Affordable Care Act. It's looking like it's on its way to being repealed, and the Republicans keep saying, well, yes, we will replace it, but with what? And is there a plan right now? That is a real, though, concern. As you said, there was $184 million that the state says it has in its coffers because of the expansion, not to mention that a good 370,000 have already signed up, and the state had projected by the summer be 400,000. So that's a big thing he might have to deal with.
And I think it's, we've got this infrastructure, as new as it is, in place with Obamacare and the expansion here in the state. But I think you get a sense that everybody's going to be ready to play jazz and just kind of improvise as things move forward to see what they have to do to make things work into the future.
If you remember, almost from his first day in office, he ran into that problem with the election of the Speaker of the House, and he didn't get his candidates, so there was somebody else, and so it started off politically troublesome. I think, though, he's been able to hold together a fairly uneasy coalition. I mean, keeping in mind he's a Democrat and they're Republicans. But the other thing on those public issues, especially with the shootings, I think he had to play a community role even beyond most governors, because the city, especially the mayor, I mean, the mayor really didn't show up and get involved. And there needed to be a leader. There needed to be a spokesman out there. And I think that the governor's father figure role, that he played that well during that part.
And I think he also touted reforms to criminal justice. He wants to have fewer people incarcerated in Louisiana. He likes the idea of changing parole and probation programs in the state. And he also likes the idea of, if you're charged with a crime at 17, you're not automatically charged as an adult for that crime at 17.
But somewhere there's someone keeping a folder of every program that was cut and every tax that was raised, and when the next election comes up, you can see his commercials. He took away this, and he raised this, and this. And it's totally unfair, but that's the way politics is.
With some sort of a big X kind of like character generated over it, and with a big loud noise, that kind of thing, yeah.
So 2017, we hear about still, a deficit that's going to have to be dealt with. And for this next week, though, the governor's in Rome.
Yeah, he is going to go. He's addressing the issue of having human trafficking, and he's going to meet with the Pope while he is there as well. So it's a big trip. I'd say it's probably his biggest overseas trip, right?
I think so. In this 1 year, he's been to Washington a lot, and I understand he's gone to Washington at least 2 more times.
February, I believe.
Soon. Yeah, well, for the Mardi Gras ball, but then also he continues to try to get money for flood victims, because we still don't have all that. Okay, thanks a lot, Curt. And we're going to go over to Danielle right now and talk about TOPS. Speaking about cuts, TOPS was certainly a very popular program, but it sustained cuts. So this is the first semester where students are not seeing full funding of their tuition.
They're not seeing anything close to full funding of their tuition. It is only, they have to pay more than half this semester. And TOPS was front-loaded, as a lot of people know, this year in the hopes that I think everybody knew was a vain hope that they would find more money for it partway through. So yeah, and I know, I really feel for all of the parents and the students who, by the time this decision was made, it's too late for anybody to suddenly come up with more money to pay for college, in any sort of comprehensive, planned way. Right.
So, the question is now, cuts happen once. Do you think they're going to continue to happen? And the governor, the legislature is going to have to still deal with this really big expenditure, positive investment certainly in our future. People really do love it, but we've got to pay for it. Right. The one proposal coming out of Board of Regents is to sort of stagger it. Right. 80% for freshmen, 90% for sophomores, 100% juniors and seniors. So students demonstrating that they're going to make it through, they're going to stick with it. What other proposals are out there, do you know?
So there's a bunch of proposals and people bracing for the likelihood that they're just not going to be able to fund it again, because they are, it would have cost $300 million to fund the program for this year, and they were more than $80 million short. So it's a big gap that they had. So yeah, the Board of Regents has some interesting ideas. What I think has gone a little less noticed, there's the staggering proposal, and then there's they're thinking about raising the credit requirements. So you have to take more classes per year. Some people say that's necessary to graduate anyway. People who are in the sciences, when of course the state's trying to get more people involved in the sciences, are saying, things like engineering labs are already incredibly heavy. How can you expect kids to do more?
Right, 30 hours it doesn't necessarily work for everybody.
It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And I think what the proposal from the Regents also does that I think is interesting is TOPS is predominantly a program for people who are middle class or better. And of course, college is extremely expensive for all families, no matter where they are. But they're also encouraging the state to more fully fund the need-based programs that do exist. Something called a GO grant. It's obviously not talked about very much. So that's, I don't know how likely it is that that's going to happen, but they are sort of responding to concerns, I think, that maybe TOPS should be more of a need-based program than a merit-based program.
That's the way it originally started, wasn't it? It was more of a need-based. Well, needless to say, it's something, again, that the legislature is going to have to deal with, that the governor is going to be hearing about. Certainly, if they're going to get an earful after experiencing this semester of having to pay more. Errol?
Danielle, UNO has offered a proposal where it would make up the deficit. How does that work?
So UNO is proposing, just for this semester, shuffling money around, essentially, and making sure that every student who's eligible for federal grants is getting and using those federal grants first. So TOPS would go on top of that to fill in the extra. But actually, one last thing I wanted to make sure we said about the proposal. The unexpected piece of this proposal is they are talking about selling naming rights to TOPS. So you would have the proposal even has suggested phrasing as like the such and such company TOPS scholarship, or the TOPS scholarship powered by such and such a company.
Well, its origin started with Taylor, with Pat Taylor. And, he was a businessman.
Pat Taylor.
That's why it's called TOPS. It's Taylor's, Taylor. So, okay, well, we'll see where that goes, because certainly we want to help our students have a very positive experience as they move on along in adulthood in the business world, and we want to keep our workforce here. That's the whole focus of it.
Just imagine if it's Smoothie King.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
Smoothie King or baby cakes.
TOPS program. Mercedes-Benz TOPS program.
We'll see. Okay, we're going to go over to Kathy now and talking banks. And a local bank has maybe had a little bit of difficulty, and so it's getting some assistance.
First NBC Bank, we've talked a little bit about it before here, has run into some difficulties with federal regulators. And this always stems from a change in their capital position, having enough capital on hand to stand up against the potential for loan losses down the line. And a few months ago, the federal regulators stepped in and declared the bank to be in, quote, troubled condition. And they forced management to look at their management plan, to look at everything really in their lending practices and so forth. And that resulted in one of the founders of the bank, the chief founder of the bank, Ashton Ryan, who founded the bank about 10 years ago with a group of investors and had been the CEO for the entire time. He was forced to step down from that position. He is still a member of the board of directors and retains the title of president, but they have an interim CEO at the moment. One of the things that really brought the trouble on their heads was their practice of tax credit lending and various tax credit exchanges that they were doing, mainly in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Of course, the bank was founded after Katrina in 2006 and was very focused on local business and the recovery of the local environment. And they did in support of that, they did a lot of lending based on historic tax credits and other kinds of tax credit programs that were available in post-Katrina New Orleans. The problem really came to be that they had too much of that on their books, and it far outweighed most of the traditional kinds of loans that they also had. At the same time, they faced the downturn in the energy industry because there are a lot of smaller businesses and companies that normally would be very strong businesses, and are not necessarily less so now, but the sector has turned down because of oil prices, and that usually causes the feds to reclassify loans, even if they're paying on those loans. And so all of that has the effect of damaging the capital position of the bank. So what's happening more recently is that it looks like Whitney Bank, which is actually owned by Hancock in Mississippi, is going to has acquired or has agreed to acquire 9 of the branch offices of First NBC Bank. And in order to raise their capital position, they will also be taking on quite a bit of their loan portfolio. And I found this interesting. I wrote a column about it recently, and it's interesting because both of these banks have names that go way back in New Orleans business history. Whitney, of course, was the oldest bank, locally based bank in Louisiana, for many years and before being taken over by Hancock. But the importance of the Whitney name is obvious in the fact that Hancock left the Whitney name on the,
Very
Louisiana
the
banks.
And they both had buildings that towered downtown, including the first NBC building.
Yeah, first NBC, of course, came from First National Bank of Commerce, which was a very successful bank and eventually sold out to Bank One, which became part of Chase Bank. And so all of those offices are now Chase. But Ashton Ryan was an executive with First National Bank of Commerce, and he took that name and he called the new bank First NBC Bank.
Okay. So the First NBC Bank, the present day.
Correct.
Whitney acquiring some of the branches, but still the bank is in operation. It still has several branches in the region.
It's still in operation. They're under some federal guidelines now, and we don't know what's going to happen next. There are rumors that the bank could be sold entirely at some point, but certainly that this transaction will boost their capital position. The question is, will it be enough?
Is there any sector of the market that it targets, that it goes after specifically? Or?
Well, they opened to do local business lending, and again, they were focused on the recovery in New Orleans, and so that's what Ashton Ryan wanted to do with that bank. So it's, the local economy, basically. But of course, that always involves oil and gas businesses as well, and service companies that we have in the New Orleans area.
Okay, Kathy, thanks a lot. We're going to go over to Errol now to start discussion about how we're going to make Bourbon Street safer.
Yeah, well, just a couple of the points I want to make, that this is not unique to New Orleans, that other cities with busy, famous streets are doing this too, like Memphis has done this. And it's all not totally related just to the shootings we have. I think part of it is fueled by what we've seen with terrorism, the possibility of somebody, going out with a machine gun. And so I think that those things, those things have influenced. And so it's not just a reflection on New Orleans, on Bourbon Street, but pretty much on the world. I know, Curt, you've been looking into this.
Yeah, I think that your points are exactly right, that it's not just so much like we had the case over the Thanksgiving holiday where we had 10 people shot, one of them died, but that was between two punks, for lack of a better term, who decided to settle a score. They didn't go there to injure a lot of people. The fear, I think, also is somebody might actually go there to injure a lot of people. And this is a city, the police department here touts itself as the best in the world for protecting large crowds. And so the city definitely wants to up its game. And if they can say, hey, we're not going to allow vehicles to go down Bourbon Street, and I think the thinking is, well, look what happened in Milan when the guy drove the 18-wheeler down. So there are other concerns besides what we're accustomed to seeing on Bourbon Street.
Well, they implemented some changes already for the New Year's holiday. They blocked access from the side streets. So as I understand it, there is a group meeting, and the mayor is the one leading all of this to come up with ideas for greater security. What are some of those ideas that are coming up?
Yeah, the mayor has sent ideas to elected leaders, business leaders, civic leaders as well, and we're already getting some pushback as well. I believe the ACLU has come out and said, hey, look, if you guys are considering using infrared cameras to somehow see if somebody is carrying a gun so that you can confront that person, we don't like that idea, because there is a law in this state that allows people who have concealed carry permits to legally and discreetly carry a firearm in a public area, and there are laws restricting them from going into some places, obviously, with that firearm. But the ACLU is concerned that those people might be singled out for some sort of scrutiny simply for doing what they're absolutely allowed to do under the law.
Well, some of the other suggestions are increased lighting.
And they've been doing that too. They have those giant light stands that they bring out. Now the question would be, would they get some more permanent outdoor lighting out there as well? And if they decide to close Bourbon Street and make it more of a pedestrian mall type situation, well, frankly, how are the beer trucks going to get down? How's the bride going to get to her reception, at the hotel? So
how are the sanitation trucks, which is really important on Bourbon Street.
They're going to have to work through all of that as well. Just even this afternoon, I asked the city, hey, when are you going to make this plan official and release it to the public so that we can all get a good look at it and not get it in bits and pieces? And I still have yet to hear that. But when you're deciding whether you want headlines about 10 people being shot on Bourbon Street, or you want headlines, and by the way, these headlines are around the world? Or do you want headlines that say, hey, the city is taking big steps to improve safety on what is probably the most famous party street in the world? Well, I think we'd take that second headline over the first one anytime. And I think we're going to see certainly pieces of this plan rolled out, because here we are in Carnival. And how bad would it look if something happened and you said, oh, well, we've got this security plan on the sidelines, but sorry about what happened.
Just to reiterate, I think the two examples in recent year or so of multiple person shootings, in both cases, it was like two guys in a fight.
Yep.
Okay, and that's all it was. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't out to get people. It was just two guys, perhaps liquored up, and they just got in a fight and shot at each other.
And in the most recent tragic shooting, there were police nearby.
Oh,
there were police
we've talked about that on this show. You know, I don't know that police presence stops anybody from doing anything. We have it on the parade routes as well, where police officers are right by somebody who thinks that they need to settle the score right now with someone else.
Okay, well, we'll see what the mayor comes up with.
And probably sooner
Yeah.
than later.
Okay, thanks a lot, Curt. Back over to Danielle right now. And charter schools. Now, the Orleans Parish School Board, with the schools that are still under their auspices right now, just about ready to be all charter.
Yeah, so they announced back in December that they were expecting to receive applications from the last 5 non-charter schools in the city to become charters, to run themselves with their current, in some cases, long-standing principals. So that's still in process. I mean, it immediately looked to everybody like a fait accompli, but it's still, I mean, it certainly still might not happen.
Now, the RSD schools that are ultimately going to be folded once again under Orleans Parish School Board, those were all charters, right?
Yes, that happened a couple of years ago with the Recovery School District schools.
And when does that merger, as it
so
were,
the
happen?
two systems merge again in a year and a half if all goes according to plan. So there's tons of meetings and so on to go on to deal with the logistics of bringing back together two sets of schools that had been run by different groups of people, and of course that run themselves within those groups of people for more than a decade now.
So in student results and progress, are we seeing progress being made in this charter approach?
I mean, that of course is the question that continues to be argued. On the whole, results have definitely been improving from like the most reliable information that we have, and it certainly goes up and down, and it's not as good as people would like it to be. But this was a city with an amazingly large number of failing schools, like just dismally bad schools where almost no students went to college, even if they managed to graduate. Right. And we're certainly not there anymore.
Let me have to get you to quickly touch on this funding issue now for state charters.
Yeah, so there's a lawsuit. The decision came out from the appeals court this week, and it's on its way to the Louisiana Supreme Court, that would block funding for one subset of state charters. Locally, it's affecting Lycée Français, International High, and the Military Maritime Academy. The argument in it at the moment, though, could be used for any school that's under the state and not under a local school board.
So that's something to closely watch. I mean, state funding could actually stop for those schools, is that?
And, I mean, the way that I read the ruling, it could be local funding as well. But they could still fund them, but they couldn't take it from the $3 billion pot of money that's protected by the Louisiana Constitution. But the state Department of Education is very chill about the moment. They're saying we'll see what the Louisiana Supreme Court has to say.
All right, Danielle, thanks a lot. Over to Kathy now. Just announced that Ochsner has now expanded even more, and the Jefferson Parish coroner, actually, Dr. Jerry Vitanovich, co-founder of a system of urgent care clinics, has sold all those to Ochsner. Right,
and he was one of the early adopters in this category. He set up some of the early urgent care centers all around the city and got a good network of about more than a dozen centers, and that's what Ochsner now has acquired, and I'm sure they paid well for it. We don't know the terms of the deal, but I'm sure it's a good price. What this does for Ochsner is make it even more of a monolith in terms of healthcare in the local area. I mean, they're just really so dominant now. And what it gives them is locations that they needed to really get their fingers out more geographically in areas that are important to them. You see them, for instance, reaching with some of these clinics into more, of course they're based in Jefferson Parish, but reaching more into the Metairie area and that sort of thing. And also, of course, at the same time, Ochsner has started up 2 emergency rooms, freestanding emergency rooms, which is a fairly new It's quite a new concept in New Orleans, but it's a booming trend across the country, and these are becoming much more common in cities around the country. So there's one already working on the West Bank in Marrero, I think it is, and another one soon to open in Mid-City. And of course, that's a very strategically important location for Ochsner because they aren't there right now. It's very close to the University Medical Center, and it's level 1 trauma center.
What is nearby is one of the urgent care centers that they just bought, so I don't know if they're going to keep both or if something's going to have to close.
Well, again, the urgent care center is a different thing than the freestanding emergency room. I mean, the freestanding emergency room is meant to be the same thing that you visit when you actually go to a hospital emergency room, although some would quibble about whether that's actually the case or not. They're very expensive to operate, but they're very important from a marketing standpoint in terms of drawing patients in. So the combination of the urgent care centers, which actually more than, I think it doubles the number of care centers that Ochsner now operates. I think they'll have 25 in the greater New Orleans area, which is very significant in terms of eventually bringing in patients and bringing loyalty to the brand and that sort of thing. And they're knocking on the doors of East Jefferson Hospital and of course West Jeff with that emergency room on the West Bank.
Well, East Jefferson is opening a freestanding
its own
emergency room as well on veterans. So, I mean, that is a change that not everybody is in favor of, saying it's the most expensive type of health care. We try to steer people away from the ER necessarily, but urgent care is certainly something that's been very popular and very well received. We have to move along now. I'm looking at the time for looking ahead. Errol.
It was announced today that Hamilton will be playing in New Orleans in 2018, one of the most popular shows on Broadway. They don't have the date yet, but it'll be coming this way. So all those people paying like $1,000 to see it on Broadway, save you money.
That's right. Come see it in New Orleans, Curt.
Starting in May, Causeway drivers will begin paying the increased tolls for safety infrastructure improvements. I'm told it's going to start on a weekend, so I'm going to call that the soft open when there's not so much traffic on the bridge. But construction probably will not begin for another year and a half.
For these safety features?
For those safety features.
And how much is the toll going to be?
It's going to be $5 if you don't have a toll tag, $3 if you do. Get a toll tag.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Curt. Kathy?
My favorite topic, Tom Benson. In the next few weeks, we may hear more news about what's going on with the dispute with his family over ownership in the Saints and the Pelicans. The trial in that matter is scheduled for February 6th, just 3 weeks away. So we'll see. They're either going to go to trial or they're going to settle very soon.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Danielle?
And the Orleans Parish School Board, new members got sworn in last night. They've chosen a new president, which is John Brown Sr. He's a retired principal. He represents the East and part of the Ninth Ward, and he's generally considered very popular, very highly respected.
All right. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.